All right, everyone, welcome. And I'm up here on stage with a fantastic panel. I have Dr. Adam back here, uh, and I have the unannounced king of Swiss cheese, Giacomo Zucco, John Carvalho of Synonym, and Pete Rizzo of Bitcoin Magazine. And we're here to discuss sats versus bits. And I was thinking about a way to open this panel, but the only thing I could think of was I sat down for a bit in my bat suit. So I think we'll get straight into it. So Adam, bits or sats?
What I've been saying is why not both, basically, which is if you have euros and cents or francs and cents or, dollars and cents, you are basically in a similar situation as bits and sats because the way the division works is that a bit, historically, it's in the Bitcoin core wallet and so on, for a long time, is 100 sats. And so the idea is that a whole Bitcoin is getting to be a larger and larger amount, like more than a Berkshire Hathaway stock, more than most people can afford, and that will just get worse and worse. And so actually using Bitcoin, it's expensive perceptionally, and it's actually hard and counterintuitive to sort of do calculations and reliably write amounts in 0.000001 Bitcoin or something, right? And so I was just thinking that bits and sats are an interesting denomination because then you get, if Bitcoin gets to be $1 million, then, you have 1 bit and 23 sats or 123 sats is the same as a dollar, right? $1.23. Whereas if you go for sats, they're very small and harder to calculate with. So that's the idea, but there are some other interesting ideas that people are going to explain as well.
So you don't think it's more confusing to add another, like to add 2 layers of denominations on top?
Well, I mean, if you like, it's like, stats are the base unit. It's kind of like in ISO units, you have different meters and then subdivisions and so on. But with a lot of currencies, Bitcoin is most commonly denominated as a reference price in US dollars, for example, right? And many of the major currencies like the Swiss franc, British pound, euro, are, within a small variation of that, 1.5 times. So something people can calculate in their head. So I think there's just a lot more risk of making a gross calculation error if you have to divide by 100 million in your head. And dividing by groups of thousands is something that people are much more familiar with because of the metric system, because of the nomenclature. And so bits versus sats at least is common to people who are used to, the US dollar, the euro, the Swiss franc, and so on. Now, of course, some people argue that, well, there's a Japanese yen where a yen is already quite a small division, and there are many other currencies like that. But at least for the people that are familiar with this model, they can use either way, right? People who are used to yen can use sats, and people who are used to dollars and cents can use bits and sats, and they're interchangeable and very easy and unambiguous for anybody to convert between, where I think the same cannot be said exactly of sats and Bitcoin, for example.
The Americans are not that familiar with the metric system, though.
Well, that's true. Yeah, I come from the UK, and there we just have a big mixture of the bear. So we have, Yeah.
All right, Giacomo, what side are you on?
I'm the winning side, basically, sets. So I'm so confident about that I can just talk about something else. No, I'm joking. But I want to make a clarification first, just for the sake of somebody that could be not so into this debate. So this is mostly an inner joke in the Bitcoin community. When we get bored, we pretend we fight, we pretend. When we agree about everything else, the only thing that we do is fighting about bits versus sets. So don't take it too seriously. And also, the good thing about Bitcoin is that we do not get to decide. Even if of course, I won this debate because that's what will happen, still, that's not decided because Bitcoin goes for itself. You cannot dominate it. But what we are saying here is not inconsequential because Adam has a wallet, green, and I'm advisor and investor in a few wallets and platforms, and John has a wallet to run, and he will decide. And Pete can write stuff with influencing people. So this debate can actually matter, even if Bitcoin doesn't care fundamentally. So back to the point. I think there are at least 3 different questions. One question is what unit to use. The second question is how to call it. And the third question is, do we even have a chance at deciding at all? The first question, I think it's controversial that we should move to the fundamental unit inside the Bitcoin protocol. I think Adam may disagree because of other consideration. John will agree on this one, but not on the second one. Bitcoin actually doesn't know what a Bitcoin is. Inside Bitcoin code, there is only basically an integer, and this integer is the 100 millionth of a bit of what we call a Bitcoin. But when Bitcoin started, this unit was so small that it was so impractical that Satoshi decided to collect 100 million of those to create a Bitcoin as a unit. But that unit doesn't matter in consensus. The smallest unit, the Satoshi, that now we call Satoshi, it actually matters for halving. When we will get sub-Satoshi, the halving will stop. When we will get under bit, the halving will do nothing. It matters for closing channels. We can close a channel with 1 Satoshi, in theory, assuming that's limit. We cannot close a channel with half a Satoshi. So it really technical is not like a gram of gold. It's more like an atom of gold. It has actually practical implication in the protocol. And the second question is how to name it. John's idea, I'm spoiling it. Oh, sorry. So John's also prepared some slides. So if you want guys to put some slides on in the meantime, you can also follow better what we're discussing. John's idea, I'm a little spoiler, is to call the small unit Bitcoin itself. But that will create, I think, some problems because at the beginning we spent a lot of time, remember maybe Antonopoulos' video in 2012, about clarifying the distinction between Bitcoin with capital B and Bitcoin with small b. One is the protocol and the asset and the other is a unit. We don't have the same problem. Like with gold, we don't say there is gold and I'm giving you a gold. Or with an internet address, we don't say there is the internet, let's go to my internet. We have different names, and Satoshi is a different name. And to the third point, it's already basically a standard. I think that even if I was not right, and I am, I think that the probability to switch at this point to add, and I think we don't get another round of real-time adoption. I mean, mostly everybody on Lightning is using sets already, and Lightning application will become anyway more relevant to final users. So I think it's basically already over, but I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not.
Yeah, John,
all right.
We have your slides going. So give us your controversial take, please.
The slides weren't meant just for me, but they were meant to provide some visual context for everything that we're comparing, because it works a lot better if you can just see it. And while the panel is called Sats versus Bits, I wanted to add, as Giacomo spoiled, Bitcoins. But here's some of what we've been talking about. So you can see here a Bitcoin and some of the popular denominations, and you can see how we symbolize them and what they actually represent as numbers. So Bitcoin is like what people kind of think is the whole unit, even though Giacomo just explained how that's not really true. For a while, maybe pre-2018, millibits were a thing. And these became things as the price went up, basically. And so people wanted to say, oh, like, use millibits. I had an app, the Exotica, that we had millibits was how we denominated things. But that got stale as well, and it never took. And then sats came along, or at least sats became popularized. But bits never really were popular. They've been popular as a proposal, like Adam is mentioning, but there hasn't really been adoption in applications and this kind of thing. And you can kind of see here that this is what they look like in the Bitcoin value column. You can see how much they represent in Bitcoin today. Finally, on the bottom, I have millisatoshi there, which is a concept that Lightning developers shouldn't have invented because they don't actually exist. Here's some symbols for sats. I guess we haven't really talked about this.
Can you go into that a little deeper, why the Lightning developers should have avoided that term? I think people want to know.
I just had a 20-minute argument about this. What am I doing? It's doing nothing now. You're stuck with this one. Oh, I'm clicking the wrong button. Okay. Millisatoshis are basically like a form of credit that nodes can have with each other in order to do sub-Satoshi units. But the problem is they can't be enforced on chain. They're not even really enforced in Lightning. They're just kind of, you trust that the node that owes you half a Satoshi, that if you build it up to 1, they will give you 1. But it's just, you trust them to do that per Satoshi, sub-Satoshi. And what I don't like about this is it causes misconceptions that Bitcoin is divisible. In other words, we can add more zeros. And as Giacomo was explaining, Bitcoin actually uses an integer set. It doesn't support decimals, so you can't actually divide a Satoshi at all. And so,
So it's not divisible without compromising trust.
well, it's not divisible, but if you want to trust somebody with your Bitcoin,
yeah.
then yeah, sure. But yeah, I have a little footnote in each of these just to make them a little more fun. And that's the footnote here is millisatoshis don't actually exist. Here, you know, another argument related that we like to have is which sat symbol to use. I'm on the side of the lightning bolt because it looks like an S, and mostly we use it for lightning. Recently, I've become a little interested in this little mini S thing. I'm not sure what it's called, but some of the core devs have started using that for sats because nobody likes the kebab, which is the third item, or the kebab or the thread. I don't know what that is, and it also looks like an Ethereum thing. And then finally, the true symbol is the $sign, but we have to kill the dollar first, so not applicable till then.
Oh, okay, shall we do a little poll here? A poll? Who's for the hands up if you're for the? Oh, can you back a slide again? So yeah, for the symbols, who's pro the flash? And who's for the retarded S? Yeah. Who's for the kebab? There's a lot of kebab people in here. Yeah. Good to see. And who's for the $sign? I like to hear. I like what I hear. Yeah. So I guess the flash wins.
Yeah. By only a little, but yeah. And so if I haven't actually made my argument. I'm sorry. We'll make sure we give Peter time. But so this is what was being proposed here. What we have today, Bitcoin and sats, which is this random dot in the middle. It's not a decimal. It's just a dot. And we use this today. Adam is proposing the second item, which is 2 dots, which to me seems more confusing. And then what I'm proposing is actually no dots. We just say it's Bitcoin, it's BTC. There are 2.1 quadrillion units, atoms, as you put them very well. And that's all that matters is how much BTC you have. And you can call it Bitcoin or Bitcoins or however you want. But what I find is talking to people, introducing them to Bitcoin, sats is just confusing because you have to say, oh, what's a sat? It stands for Satoshi. Satoshi was the guy, and you have to like explain all this shit. And that's not necessary because it's just all Bitcoin. And then the whole Bitcoin concept is just kind of made up as well. Like it's arbitrary. It could be that dot could be anywhere, and we could call it a Bitcoin.
Yeah. So as Hamlet would put it, to dot or not to dot, regardless, it's a lot, right? Okay, Pete.
Right.
What's your stance on this
great.
issue?
I was just fiending to get on the mic here. Pete Rizzo, representing I think everyone up here who thinks that this argument is very silly, right? Like this is a very incredibly silly argument. So yeah, what I would say I think is that I don't get it, right? I mean, I have been in the Bitcoin space for 10 years, and I've been told the market is always right? That the market is deciding and will decide. Hasn't the market decided? Don't we have a system of Bitcoins and Satoshis? Isn't that something that is universal consensus? And why are we trying to fix what's broken? Second, I would say bits and sats. This is a fiat mindset, Adam. This is, if you're going to drag the cultural old ways of the fiat world, the financial world, into Bitcoin, Satoshis, to what John was just saying, you do have to explain the culture. You have to say what a Satoshi is, and I think that we should, right? It's important that we imbue our culture onto new people because we are building something that's new and radically different, or I think that's the goal. So I think I'm Team Sats.
There is no lack of people representing Satoshi when it comes to talking about Bitcoin. I don't think whether we use it as the base unit is going to make much effect there. Whether this all matters, I think that it matters because every time people get into Bitcoin, they try to find a way to contribute somehow, and they like to contribute to the arguments. And the current system causes confusion. It makes people think that we can have more zeros because it's a decimal place, but we can't actually. In order to have more zeros, we actually have to multiply the supply, and most people would be very averse to that idea. he said, why would they think that we need more zeros? Oh, because for some reason people think that number will go up forever, and we're gonna need them because one sat will be worth too much. Yeah, I don't believe that, because I actually think 2.1 quadrillion units is enough precision for the entire economy of the world.
Well, when people say number will go up forever, what they're alluding to, I think, is that the Fed will print dollars forever, right? Until they destroy themselves.
It hits infinity before it hits, like one sat being worth so much, it hits infinity before it hits that much. Like Bitcoin, I don't think will ever be worth one Bitcoin $5 million. It'll be more likely to have one Bitcoin infinite dollars.
So how can we tell when it has hit infinity? Because I find that concept a bit confusing, hitting infinity. All right. Well,
I guess the dollar will cease to exist or go like the Weimar Republic, Deutschmark, right? Yeah, I think that numbers do matter a bit in the sense of unit bias. So I think many people in this room will have had a conversation with somebody, whether they're a programmer or just an acquaintance even, that what the price of Bitcoin is, and they go, wow, I can't afford one of those, right? And then you have to explain to them, well, you can buy part of a Bitcoin, And this conversation, that same pattern, happens with developers too, who you would think would understand or intuit that was the case. So I think already the price today is a lot of money to a lot of people in the world, right? I mean, we're sitting here in a relatively wealthy developed country, but there are lots of people in the world that $30,000 is an unimaginable amount of money, right? So, and I think it also helps to, if you have a target in mind that Bitcoin might reach some price in the future, it's useful if that price is, a target that's achievable within, I don't know, 3 or 5 years or something, right? If it's like, well, maybe that's possible, or maybe it's not, or maybe it's only possible if there's hyperinflation in the US dollar or something, right? And I think dollar Satoshi parity is like more than, you could buy the planet for that in Bitcoin, right? And unless the dollar hyperinflates.
Comments on that, Giacomo?
Yeah, a few comments. So for the first comment is that I think John is really thinking short term, because he's thinking about the solar system and basically the next 1,000 years. But we are Bitcoiners, we plan for the long term. So maybe we could be to the point we need to divide the Satoshi. I disagree that the only way is credit. There may be some clever way without changing the protocol where you can have a deterministic probabilistic lottery where when you close the channel, the probability that you get to get the Satoshi is proportional to the amount of sub-Satoshis. So it's convoluted, but maybe people in 5,000 DC and on the next Proxima Centauri colonization, they will need it. So
why denominate in years though? We'd think in decades, right?
Or blocks,
centuries, centuries. Yeah.
Or blocks.
Yeah, blocks, of course.
Or halvings.
Halvings.
The second, so I don't know. I'm not so sure that, for example, people that think that inflation should go on forever, if we had infinite divisibility, the inflation will go on forever, but without ever touching the total supply, without ever going beyond the 2.1 quadrillions, because it's basically an asymptote. So it could be interesting for our post civilization stuff. The second comment was basically that I had a little bit of a joke, but the dollar is actually used as a symbol in many, many currencies that are not United States dollars. They're like South America is everywhere, many Caribbean islands. So it's already used for many things that are not the dollars. The problem is to use that in Bitcoin right now is that in those economies, you have the local economy where that symbol means something, and then you have the global where the dollar is dominant. In Bitcoin, you will have a lot of conflict, so I agree that will be, it would be fun to watch, I think. If everybody convert that to the standard, it would be a mess, but it would probably be fun to watch. The other thing is that one of the reasons I oppose I am all for using the actual unit and not the block of 100 units. But even if we wanted to use hectosets, so 100 sets, I would still dislike bit a lot because, first of all, a millibit was already used, as John said, and millibit is not a thousandth of a bit, but it's actually a kilobit. So that's quite complex, right?
Wait
That's
a
already.
second, the millibit is a mistake. It should be milli Bitcoin. You see the middle symbol.
Yeah,
just to
yeah.
be pedantic.
I think
it's
that
not a
people just.
millibit, it's a milli Bitcoin.
I think that people just started to short millibitcoin into millibit, and that created a mess. And also, my main problem is that bit is a relevant concept in computer science. When you have a wallet, your seed phrase will have some entropy. So you will have some sets included in some bits of your entropy. And when you will send a transaction, you will buy space on chain. So we will basically buy bits using your sets. So yeah, that's kind of chaotic. Yeah.
So calling millibitcoin a kilobit instead would cause even more confusion, I guess, because of the unit bias.
Gigasats.
Gigasats, yeah, that's one. Yeah, 100th of a gigasat, yes. The millibit. Oh.
Well, a couple things here.
Who's good with calculation?
I think that if we went with just using integers and calling it Bitcoin, that eventually people would probably call the base unit bits, because it's like pieces of a Bitcoin. And I think that would just happen naturally. But you first have to start with just calling it all BTC. And if you just, and that's something people can grasp today. Like in our wallet, we could just put BTC, and we could just show no decimals, and people would infer it, right? Because they know that they don't have a million BTC, right?
Don't you?
Well, no. What you do is you invert it. You price in Moscow time. So you say, okay, instead of pricing, why do you want to price in dollars for? They should be pricing in sats.
Okay, John.
Right?
I think to play the devil's advocate here, I think some people would say, "Hey, you told me years ago there will only ever be 21 million bitcoins, and now there's 2.1 quadrillion all of a sudden. What happened to the supply?"
You just say no. It was always the same amount. It's still the same amount. It's just we changed the word we use, basically.
Just a quick comment, Peter, then I give it to you. But people, you may think that the moderator is like unbiased and impartial, but you see the pin there, like infinity over 21 million. So if we switch it to 2.1 quadrillion, Knut will have to change all the merchandising. So that's the only reason is being partial to this.
Well, the
21Q rhymes. You can say it's nice.
Well, the result would be the same, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, you can still do it. And I also wanted to mention, like, I have also thought a lot about whether you could express a sub-Satoshi. And all of the solutions basically resort to, you have to actually add a support to another asset to Bitcoin. So you have to have some sort of other thing that's worth a Satoshi, that can be denominated under a Satoshi and then convert it. And the problem is it's just not Bitcoin. It's just some
Bitcoin
other
Cash, maybe.
abstraction. That you can create an abstraction. And honestly, it makes a lot more sense. I know this will be like taboo to pretty much everybody, except Adam, I think. It makes a lot more sense to just understand that if you want more precision, you actually have to multiply the supply proportionally. That's the only solution. And so if you want more precision, if you want another decimal place, you need 10 times more Bitcoin. Like, it's the only way to do it.
I'm not going to argue that last point, but I would just say that, in the conversations before, when I understood what John was saying about the Bitcoin using, sort of naming sats Bitcoin, that it seemed interesting to me after thinking about it a bit, because it's kind of like a currency redenomination. And the other experiences we have with radical currency redenominations are things like the Zimbabwean dollar, where they knocked off 12 zeros because they'd had massive hyperinflation and were using like quadrillion dollar and 100 quadrillion dollar notes. And so they made a new Zimbabwean dollar that removed like 12 zeros. And before the euro, I think Italy had some less extreme version of that. And so it's kind of a show of strength that Bitcoin would do the opposite, right? Which was add zeros because it's getting too valuable. Like I think all of the times this has occurred in history, because fiat currencies inherently inflate because governments get greedy and print more. This is the only time that a currency's done the opposite, a redenomination in a positive sense. So there might be, a period of confusion, and certainly anybody who sent a Bitcoin with an old wallet, not realizing it wasn't a sat, would be extremely sad for a while. But, on the other hand, if you're going to redenominate, you want to do it before there are too many users or something. Yeah. So anyway, just to support that.
Then Peter.
One interesting thing is we have a dust limit, so it's hard to get tricked by one sat. So, you know what I mean? You won't receive one fake Bitcoin. And so we kind of have mitigation there. Now I forgot the other thing I was going to say.
I wanted to give a little bit of a defense of the status quo. So to me, I think the status quo is that there is a Bitcoin, which is 100 million sats, and there are Satoshis. So I think we have to think a little bit about Satoshi Nakamoto, the inventor of Bitcoin, and what he wanted to achieve and why we maybe needed these two units, right? So you need the Satoshi because there needs to be something at the protocol level for the computers to actually recognize. And then you needed a Bitcoin, right, which is this larger set unit. And so this kind of touches on a little bit what Adam was saying about adoption. Imagine when Bitcoin hit $1 in 2011. What was the Satoshi price when Bitcoin was $1? Would that have been headline news? And I think the answer is no. And even today, right, would Bitcoin be as interesting as it is if the headlines were Bitcoin still fighting to achieve 1 cent after 15 years, right? So I think there was a practical reason to bundle Bitcoin, right, into a unit. So you have a unit that is a bundle of Bitcoin. That is actually helping adoption because that is what drives the interest. When everybody's on Twitter this morning, what are you happy about? The Bitcoin price is $30,000. You're not tweeting that Bitcoin, a sat price is still less than a cent, right? So we have these two parts of adoption, right? One is that we need to get external interest, generate external interest, and advertise that we're competing with the external currency systems, which Bitcoin achieves. And then there's the subunit, right, which the computers recognize, but I would also argue has an adoption component, right? So people who understand Bitcoin know that they can acquire Satoshis, and they can think and price in Satoshis, and they can acquire Satoshis. I think a lot of people here are stacking sats. That's the parlance, right? So I don't think we need more than these two things, right? There's this one bundle expression whose job is to generate external interests, and there's this one unit that people are acquiring or people who know that the network understands. So I actually think the status quo is quite beautiful. So I just want to throw that out there.
You set me up perfectly for the thing I forgot to say, which is the complete opposite is maybe more true in that unit bias is very strong. A lot of the attraction to shitcoins and thus a lot of the scamming and thus loss of interest in Bitcoin can be attributed to just stupid little things like unit bias where they say, I can't afford a whole Bitcoin, so I'm going to buy this. I'll have much more units of them. I want to have, 1,000 XRP and this kind of thing. Even more. And so in other words, he was saying that even XRP has decimals. Well, those decimals probably aren't real either. But well, the idea here is you like that there is a fat denomination. None of our proposals remove that possibility. You just call it whatever you want. And would it not be even better to call that denomination a Satoshi and say, oh, wow, I have a whole Satoshi? That's even more of an homage to him, right?
So it sounds like you want to convince everybody to keep things the same, but just switch them around, and they won't be confused.
Well, what I primarily care about is just being accurate, so this way people can make accurate, assumptions when they're arguing things about Bitcoin. And thus, adding more decimals makes no sense because there are no decimals. Thus, having any decimals makes no sense. And so mostly I just care about it being accurate. I think if we made it accurate, the rest would follow. If we needed a bundle that had a name, it would have a name and we would use that name. If we needed the base unit to be called something other than sats or other than bits or other than Bitcoin, it would just get called that.
But the name of this panel is sats versus bits, right? And aren't bits a middle integer between sats and satoshis? I don't recognize the I don't
That's the name of the panel.
Yeah, that's
So since nobody is confused enough by just switching Bitcoin with sets, I would propose another thing. My good friend Luke Dashir rightly argues that the decimal system is evil because it's fiat. It was imposed top-down by the French revolutionaries. So we should switch to tonal.
He's American, right?
He's American, but it's pro-tonal system, which is basically hexadecimal. So let's all switch to tonal, and that will be easier for everybody.
We may not manage to change how people what words people use here, but at least we managed to change the name of the panel, which I think is an accomplishment in itself. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they'll do. So I think the other interesting question, and it seems to me, I've talked to some developers who were working on Bitcoin before I got involved, that there's some sort of history lost in time about why did Bitcoin end up with 8 decimal places and not 6? You know, most things are thousands and millions, not 100 million. And it's a kind of odd division, and so it sort of creates a little bit of confusion when trying to do mental arithmetic. And so apparently in the source code there is a cent like symbol, and I think it's like 100th of a Bitcoin actually. And another story, I don't know how correct this is, was that Hal Finney had suggested to Satoshi that that there was an original Bitcoin like pre-release that had 21, well, I guess 2.1 billion bit cents basically, right? So 21 million Bitcoin and only 2 divisions afterwards. And Hal Finney, who famously posted projections that Bitcoin should reach $10 million in like the second day after it was launched or something immediate, right? That was nowhere near enough, and persuaded Satoshi to add some more digits. So we just added them in groups of 3 and added 6. So from that point of view, we have a confused starting point, right? We had cents that now have 6 digits after them, and then we're trying to figure out what to do with it.
So what you're saying is Hal Finney 1 million X'd the supply. So yeah, we already had an inflation of Bitcoin that was massive.
But if you add divisibility, you don't really increase the supply necessarily, unless you do that after the only moment in which you're right is after the last halving. So after the last halving, the supply is cut to 0. Instead, if you have precision, you go on asymptotically. But right now, if you increase precision, it's like if you go from, if you measure something in meters or centimeters, you're not changing the length. You're just changing the internal, let's say, granularity. After the last halving in 2160 or whatever, then you are right, we will increase the supply, never of one entire unit, so we will still be approaching forever, Laura, forever, 2.1 quadrillion, but never really getting there.
Actually, Adam and I have debated this a lot and thought about the repercussions of adding more decimals or multiplying the supply either way. And I think that Adam would say, sorry for speaking for you, but you've said it to me more than once, that like even if I'm right that it's multiplying and not dividing, that it would be a proportional change, and thus it would not have an effect. But there are some ways that it affects things, because what it does is it devalues the value of a UTXO. So you can have a lot more UTXOs with more precision. And so there are consequences of even adding more zeros. And so that's another thing that I want people to be able to grasp, and why I like removing the decimals, because it's really, really hard for people to explain this concept when they think it's actually a decimal and not an integer.
So I was going to talk about something that Giacomo mentioned, which is ambiguity in language. And so a bit is many different things, but one example of what a bit was before the invention of digital computers and probably binary numbering systems was a piece of 8, an 8th division of a certain weight of gold coin that was perforated, so you could snap it into little triangles. And I think the other point is, what societies tend to call things evolves, like language evolves, and people love sort of ambiguity. I think they almost think it's fun, and at least the English language is full of dozens of ambiguous words that people just seem to enjoy using and making up new slang and stuff. So wouldn't necessarily worry about redundancy, but also, the market will decide. The next generation will decide what they're going to call all of these things when the value is very different.
Okay, so blockchain or time chain? No, just kidding. I think
it's time chain.
We don't have very many minutes left. I think I'd like to do a little poll, another little poll before we quit. Who's pro bits or bits and sats? Like bits and sats. Let's represent it properly. Who's hands up? Who likes the bits sats idea?
Okay, no, that's good.
Adam, I'm afraid you wouldn't win an election in this room.
Democracy, I love democracy.
Okay, and who's pro sats?
Yes, let's get them up. Sats.
And who's pro making John the CEO of Bitcoin and having him decide everything. Yeah, you got some fans, John. More than Adam. Good work. And who's pro Pete Rizzo's stance, which is, I may paraphrase, is, fuck you, this is a stupid panel, let's get out of here. Yeah.
That's a misquote. So.
Oh, okay, a misquote. Sorry about that. It's a TLDR.
Yeah.
That's my attempt at journalism, I guess.
I want to add just a little comment that any of these options, whether they're different from what we have today, the idea of the market decides is like, we are the market. And so it could be something as small as all the guys on this stage agreeing to change their apps to this, and then asking a couple of exchanges to agree, and that kicks off everything. So none of this is impossible. A lot of people think it's too late to do something like this. Well, there was a time when some of the things we do today weren't used the way they're used today, and we've just shown that and talked about it. So the only thing stopping us is us, really.
Yes, we are the market, we are all Satoshi, and we are our Bitcoins. Oh, Adam.
We're supposed to be finished, but I was just going to add to what John said, which is actually almost most of the wallets have actually a user choice, and they just have a default, right? So most of them can do Bitcoin, millibits, bits, and sats in a user interface, and they just have different defaults, I guess, mostly Bitcoin, actually.
It's just that nobody chooses bits.
And on it goes. Thank you very much, everyone. Big round of applause for Adam, Giacomo, John, and Pete.